For years I wanted to do an instrumental album. It's quite good to kind of revisit your own work sometimes and look at it in a fresh way and try and see where it can go. Jazz is something that's always been quite, dear to my heart, as it were. I mean, when I started going to concerts and listening to and buying records, some of the first records I bought were jazz records. Well, I thought it would be nice to do an instrumental record. I wasn't quite sure which form it would take in particular, which period, which genre really, whether it would be a more kind of orchestral or something, I don't know. I was very lucky to have Colin Good working with me again, who he's actually worked with me for quite a few years now.
Well, first of all, it has to be said that this is entirely Bryan's project, and that it was his idea and his enthusiasm that got this going in the first place. And the other thing is that's very, very important to recognise that he's very, very knowledgeable about the original music of the 20s and has listened to a lot of it, and it's something that I know that he loves.
I've sort of gone back in time. I've been listening to Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, and those kind of bands which really started the whole jazz thing going, really. The 1920s was a kind of very fertile period, and it was kind of the beginning of modernism. Of some fantastic things began to happen in the 20s. With T.S. Eliot wrote The Wasteland. People always think of Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, and Beautiful and the Damned, and so on, kind of depicting the New York high society or kind of bright young things.
When Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby, America was going through it was coming out of huge trauma of World War I. And it was going on this enormous, I think Fitzgerald himself called it this great, gaudiest, most extravagant spree in history. It was coming out of that time, and everyone was living as if they were living on borrowed time. So all that pent-up energy was there. And I think that was very much the age which Fitzgerald caught, and no one caught it better than he did in that age of the Roaring Twenties, as it was called.
You have to remember how segregated the United States were in 1920. The segregation in restaurants, in buses, in transport, in the army was absolute. It is a world which is shocking to us now, shocking to modern Americans. Now, the first sign of the breakdown, I think, is jazz. Jazz, of course, had been music among the black community for years. African Americans had all had listened to something like this, a sort of proto-jazz, for a long time. But now The new thing was that this now appealed to sophisticates in the great American cities, and particularly in New York. Part of this was that it wasn't just black performers and white appreciators. It was actually in the jazz clubs, they went and they became friendly with the black musicians. And they participated, and some of them played the music themselves. It was a new thing. This is really the beginning of desegregation. I think jazz did it in a way we can hardly imagine now.
When it came to choosing which songs we worked on, it was a matter of trial and error, really. We thought, well, we wanted to have a balance of songs from different periods. I mean, one is quite recent, one was from the last album, Olympia.
This was a completely off-the-wall experiment to see whether or not his own material would suit the 20s style, using virtually the same musicians that we used for As Time Goes By. And we were just amazed how, those melodies just worked in this format.
To start with, I think I was looking for songs in the back catalogue of Roxy Music and Bryan Ferry songs that were constructed a bit like standards or jazz compositions from the 20s period. Love is the Drug, for example, I immediately thought, oh yes, we can turn this into a sort of Ellingtonian, sort of bluesy moan. What was in my head when thinking about this was there's a Duke Ellington, a very famous Duke Ellington record. It was his signature tune for years called East St. Louis Toodaloo, which goes like this. And so on, And so that feel was what I thought would work well with this. So. Sort of very thick orchestration down here.
Collingwood is the piano player and arranger, and effectively the band leader. It's great to have all these players who are specialists in different periods. I mean, the 20s and 30s, the guys that we have are really very, very good.
The band were all really interesting, great characters, all of them, all quite unique, slightly eccentric in places, but really good fun. And I don't think they quite knew what to expect either for the sessions. It was all a bit of an experiment. But I think they embraced it and they really got into it.
The musicians that I chose are ones that I have known and played with for sort of 20-odd years, actually. Rico Tommaso and Malcolm Earl Smith on trombone and John Sutton on drums, Martin Wheatley on guitar. These are all people that I've worked with for many years. And of course, all of those people also appeared on As Time Goes By album, which we made back in 1999. Most of the band had worked with Bryan before and indeed done a tour and so on.
Richard White is the new boy in the band. Very good clarinet player and plays bass saxophone, which we never used before. So instead of having a double bass a lot of the time, a string bass, we use a bass sax, which gives it a very period feel.
There's something about these older horns, this one was probably made in about 1921, that has can't say a louder tone, but a fatter, parpier tone.
Okay, one more.
It was very good having all the different horn players. The three clarinets were particularly good. Richard and Alan and Robert, who all helped to create that kind of Duke Ellington sound. His early arrangements feature kind of two or three clarinets. It's great actually to start liking the clarinet again, because I'd gone off it a bit for the 30 years or so.
Okay, start with the clarinet. Okay, this is the clarinet, which it's the instrument I started on. I love it. It's got lots of different sounds on it. That's called the Chalumeau register, lovely, low, rich area of the clarinet. And there's the kind of middle bit. That bit, and then there's the top bit.
And so I kind of got back into the sound of the clarinet, especially the way Richard plays it in a very dark, woody kind of tone, which is very, very good.
We started with a clean slate, and it was interesting that as we were putting tracks down and Bryan was able to feed in and say, do like that, don't like that, could we try, that sort of caper. And I think we've defined ourselves as we've gone along. It's still very much Bryan's project, but with input from 7 or 8 other different sources. So that's been a very interesting process.
The direction from Bryan came as to whether or not they were going in the right direction, and he would stop them and say, no, I don't like where that's going, let's try something else. What about if we did it? He would then make suggestions about other styles, or maybe one of the musicians should take a solo and another one should stay out for a particular verse, or try it on the clarinet, try it on the bass sax. So the input was there, but the band themselves put put the arrangements together in the studio.
The process of recording is very much everybody chipping in ideas, and the guys, including Bryan in the box, either rejecting them or saying there might be a spark or something there.
I wouldn't have said necessarily that there would have been any place for my skills on this, and it turns out there has been. So that's been an exciting thing.
If a track wasn't working, many times, one guy or the other would come up with a different way of doing a track, maybe a different approach, and that often helped us through a bit of a sticky patch.
The band did a remarkable job. I mean, it was a great situation to have so many great musicians that know that era of music so well, for them to say, hey, we could do it in this style. Hey, well, they used to do that in the 20s. Maybe we should try this. So it was a real throw around in the studio and fun.
I was very curious from the outset to see, which songs would stand up on their own without the lyrics and without the singing and so on.
During the process of putting the songs together, though, we began to discover that actually we could play things that didn't immediately seem obvious. There were other tunes that we could transform. Is the opening of Just Like You. And all we had to do was to sort of add a sort of 20s style, particularly a sort of dance band sort of style. And so on. And that is easily transformed.
There's a new sensation, a fabulous creation, a danceable solution to teenage revolution. Do the strand, love, when you feel love.
So one of the ones that we did in an early stage, for example, was Do the Strand, which I could hear immediately sort of had potential. But in the original, it has this sort of feel. Which doesn't have any feeling of the 20s. So there, if you do something that was very common in 20s jazz, which is to start with an instrumental break, and so instead of going like that, you go. And just improvise over the chord sequence. That was the way to sort of transform a song like that.
It's a pleasure to actually hear an artist like Bryan attempt some period music without using the regular session players that do everything. We don't come in here and say, right, we're going to play this number like Louis Armstrong and his Hot Five, or like King Oliver. It's been an experiment right from the beginning, and some things have just sparked off like that. And the main reason it's worked, I think, is because we have like-minded musicians who are familiar with the various styles of the early periods of jazz.
one more. It's our fourth one. Oh dear. See, that was all your fault.
Phew. Just getting to number 5.
Well, the trumpet is a very expressive instrument, and Rico is a master. It's great to have someone, you know, who can play so convincingly in the style of that period.
I mean, Rico's fantastic. Every time Rico played, it got better.
Yeah.
To me, I always seemed, you know, I thought, oh yeah, it's great, you know, what he did.
Yeah.
That trumpet part, so important.
Oh yeah,
You
it's
know,
the lead.
but there's no other player like Rico, really.
He has all the different kind of mutes, and which give all the different colours, because the trumpet is quite versatile.
Initially, I started on the basic trumpet, which is a modern instrument. But increasingly, as we started to record these tracks, I moved over to this earlier instrument. But this is a 1923, and it's more of a cornet. It's called a long model cornet. And the sound is more authentic, so I ended up doing most of the tracks on this instrument. This is my latest acquisition, which is called a pixie mute, basically because it goes inside the bell and doesn't protrude so much. So there are some of the textures I can get with using various mutes.
The classic dance of the 20s that everybody knows is the Charleston. Even in things that have been written, you know, today, you hear the Charleston rhythm quite often. I thought was one that I realised had that. I was just thinking of tunes, and I thought, well, yes, yeah. There was I thought, wasn't there, which goes dum bum. In its original form, you would barely detect that as being the same rhythm as the Charleston, which goes. Okay, but if you just take the tempo of it up slightly and just play the rhythm. Like that, instantly you hear that it's not entirely dissimilar to James P. Johnson's song, you know.
If you think back, you know, to the way that the original recordings in the 20s were done, they didn't have recording studios on a lot of those early recordings. They were done in halls, or they were done in theatres, they were done in spaces, and you know, the musicians had to get it right.
There's a high degree of spontaneity in the music that you have to try and create the conditions to encourage. And the best way of doing that, funnily enough, is to get into quite a small room. So in that sense, we were creating the sort of conditions that early jazz records would have been made.
Well, it was always said, wasn't it, that the rhythm section should be felt rather than heard.
The bass drum is a mid-30s Carlton, English make. The snare drums are Slingerland Radio King, about 1938. And very, very simple. That's the key. I think that simplicity to it.
Well, I played a Wayman Orchestra model number 2, which is from 1926, and the guitar is a Gibson L7, that's 1936. And you have to get the sound, even to get the feel, you have to have the right instruments.
I think so.
They just don't have the right amount of resistance, modern instruments, I don't think.
Bryan has been completely hands-on from start to finish, as you'd expect. Colin would bring the original arrangement, the band would start playing, Bryan would just keep dipping in and out, but then he can maybe say, it's too fast, it's too slow, it sounds too much like the original or it sounds nothing like the original. It was striking that balance between getting a flavour of the melody that people would know and recognise, but also not making it just sort of ape his vocal. He's not interested in that.
The problem that we had is it's a fine line between it sounding like a 50s trad band and it sounding like a 20s authentic orchestra. And that was when the arrangements tilted 1 degree too much towards, trad. Bryan didn't want to go there, so that was tough. So some of the songs that we haven't used on this record, just went too far that way.
He really got into the sound we put on it. I think it helped him feel that it felt like a sort of 20s project, and it is interesting that you feel these songs could have been done in the 20s.
We did kind of help to give the tracks a kind of period sound by the sort of technical wizardry of Simon, Willie the engineer, and Rhett, who produces with me.
In the first instance, I just applied a radical EQ to the overall mix of the tracks, and we tried out all different types of EQ to make it sound sort of old. And then we settled upon one we actually really liked, which we sort of lived with for a couple of months. But then when we came to mix the album, we put the same kind of EQ on individual tracks and then tweaked it a little bit to make it not so severe, because just give ourselves a bit more control. Our first EQ experiment on the mix was based on an Oratone preset, and it sounded like this. We finally ended up with this more subtle EQ, which is actually quite a basic plug-in, but it gave us the sound that we liked. And it went from this to this.
It's quite interesting to see people's reaction when they think they're listening to a record from the 20s, and then suddenly they recognise it's Do the Strand or, Slave for Love or something, and it amuses me to watch them this kind of gradual recognition take place. The feeling for that period was very beautifully expressed, and the music by Paul Collin, who is this kind of French illustrator, graphic artist, who was a boyfriend of Josephine Baker, who was one of the great kind of figures of the time, but in Paris. A lot of his kind of best drawings were actually from jazz posters to go with, music events and clubs, whatever. So we used Paul Collin illustrations for the artwork, which I think tries to get some of that feeling of the Cotton Club and the sophistication of that period. Just work perfect, I think, with the music that we've made here. So it's a great marriage. Well, Fitzgerald, of course, is the great giant who captured the whole spirit of 1920s New York. When I first read Fitzgerald as a schoolboy, teenager, I just kind of really took to it. I kind of like reading about the period and the way he described everything. And there's something very romantic about the way he writes. And there's a kind of sadness there, which I found appealing as well, which kind of seemed to tie in with the kind of lot of the music that I like. I was very pleased when Baz Luhrmann called us. He'd heard the Jazz Age album and wanted to use some of the tracks for his film of The Great Gatsby. And it turned out that he then found that the music we did worked very well in the film, so he commissioned us to do some more tracks, which would go into the soundtrack.
Bryan Ferry's really into traditional jazz, and he's releasing an album basically obsessively about Fitzgerald, the world of Gatsby. So I hear Bryan's album, I go, my God, Bryan Ferry has created the sound. I said to Bryan, what about if you took our themes and you did it with your band?
Crazy in Love is one of the tracks we've done for Gatsby, the Beyonce song. It's quite amusing to do something that's so contemporary, to take that back into the 20s style, which, you know, obviously fits the mood and the period of this film.
I like that.
Baz also got us to do in the 1920s style some of the scored music which had been done for the film. So a couple of things, you know, we played ourselves in that style.
Is this bass line, sustained bass line working, or would it be better?
Amy Winehouse's song "Back to Black" is a big favourite of mine, and this is one of the songs that Baz wanted to use. So we did a version which took it back into period, and I did a vocal on that version as well.
Lovely. Well done. Lovely. Beautiful.
Another track that we did for Gatsby was a variation on the Charleston. It's loosely based on a Will.i.am track. that'll be used in one of the party scenes of the film.
So we're doing the second one.
What you should do the first time. I hope you're recording this.
Oh, absolutely, everything.
Step on the track.
Brilliant.
Not brilliant, disaster.
Okay, so there's 8 bars before we do
Let's
that.
just try one.
Go straight on there. Go on then.
1, 2, 3, 4.
When we did the Jazz Age album, we made a conscious decision to make it an instrumental record. For Gatsby, we did a vocal version of Love Is the Drug. I'm looking forward to seeing that in the final movie.
He becomes the Bryan Ferry Jazz Orchestra, and he becomes the kind of traditional jazz voice of the movie. And it's truly beautiful what he's doing.
1, 2, 3, 4.
To wait for the bell to ring. 10 more big days, the toll of the bell. Aggravated, spare for days. I troll downtown, a red light place. Jump up, bubble up, what's in store? Love is the drug and I need the score. Showing up, hit and run. Boy meets girl where the beat goes on. Stitched up tight, can't shake free. Love is the drug, got a hook on me. Oh, get that buzz. Love is the drug you're thinking of. Oh, can't you see? Love is the drug for me. Love is drug.